A reminder from the Louisiana Health Department, now that it's heating up outside, it says protect yourself from mosquitoes that can carry West Nile. Kenya Ross reports.
With 2 weeks away of the official summer season, the State Department of Health is warning Louisiana about the West Nile virus. Anyone can become exposed to this virus if they're bitten by a mosquito. If someone gets affected by the virus, they'll experience a flu-like illness, which includes symptoms such as a fever, headache, body aches, nausea, and rashes. The State Department of Health says the warmer months mean more mosquito activity. According to the LDH Ag Center, high summer temperatures can also limit a mosquito's ability to survive unless it has already adapted to this type of environment. Last year, the state experienced 65 West Nile cases, including 46 neuroinvasive disease cases, which is a more severe form of the West Nile virus. The State Department of Health reported 4 deaths for 2023. Also, the State Department says that a small percentage of people sickened by the West Nile virus can develop a severe form of the infection, which can lead to hospitalization or death. So far, the State Department of Health hasn't seen any cases of the virus in 2024, but they'll begin reporting the number of cases every week during the first week of July. On KNOE.com, we'll have tips on how to protect yourself and your home from mosquitoes. In Monroe, Kenya Ross, KNOE 8 News.